Welcome to the Korea Society's video series, Author Talks. Cursed Bunny is the wildly original debut story collection from our guest, Bora Chung. Her stories are modern fables, blending elements of horror, fantasy, surrealism, and sci-fi, creating an absurd and chilling universe that illuminates the ills of contemporary society. The 10 stories in this collection are imaginative, thought-provoking, and deeply unsettling, destined to haunt readers for weeks after reading. Published in the US for the very first time and translated by the acclaimed Anton Hur, Cursed Bunny was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize and was the winner of a Heim Grant. The author, Bora Chung, has published 3 novels and 3 collections of short stories in Korean. After living in the US and studying at Yale University and Indiana University, she moved back to Korea, where she has taught literature and science fiction in universities and translated modern literary works in Russian and Polish into Korean. She joins us from her home in Pohang, Korea. Welcome to the Korea Society, Bora. It's very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
So, Cursed Bunny is a collection of 10 stories, 10 short stories. If you can tell us a little bit about when these stories were written and sort of where you were in your career. I believe The Head, which is the very first story in the collection, is in fact the very first story you published. So can you tell us a little bit about the chronology of these stories?
As you said, The Head is the oldest. It's from the 20th century. I was in college and they had a literary contest with a cash prize and I wanted the money. So I wrote it for money in 1998. The newest one is Goodbye, My Love, which is from 2016. So the stories are relatively old. The book itself was first published in Korea in 2017. So the newest in the collection, it was written in 2015, 2016. The title story itself was written at the end of 2015. So it spans a period of 17 years, 16 years, something like that.
So you were a student in Korea at the time, studying Russian literature, I believe.
Yes,
That was your
Russian
major.
yeah.
And afterwards, you went to grad schools in the United States to study Russian and Slavic literature, and you ended up with a PhD. So why did you start writing your own stories? Was it really just for the prize money, or what were you thinking when you started writing your own stories?
Actually, it was for the prize money. And I really enjoyed imagining other worlds. And I don't have any visual talent or any musical talent. And it costs the least to write because you can just imagine in your head, and then all you need is a piece of paper and something to write with. So yeah, that's why I did it, mainly because I enjoyed it.
And so, speaking of your writings, your stories are often described as sort of involving the themes of magical realism, horror, and science fiction. Although when we actually read your work, it's very hard to sort of pin down exactly what the stories are in terms of a clear-cut genre. So I wanted to ask you, do you ever think about a genre, like I'm gonna write a sci-fi story or I'm gonna write a horror story when you write? Or was there anything that you were interested in writing when you first started writing your own stories?
When I first started writing, nobody taught me how to write. I never learned how to write fiction, so I just wrote whatever I thought would be interesting to the jury of that literary contest. I sold my soul, yeah, for money. So I'm sorry, but I evolved as a student of literature, of literary theory, and I also evolved. Well, I got older and I lived life and got more experience. So I started to experiment with other genres, and I became more aware of the specific topics and the specific techniques of each genre because I studied it. So now I think, well, this has to be science fiction because it's because I want to imagine a better future for the minorities, or imagine a better future for the disabled, or something like that. Or when I have a writer's block, I rely on writing horror stories. I write about ghosts, and that kind of resolves the writer's block. That's my favorite thing to write about.
That's really interesting you say that, because when I read some of your stories, it did really feel like nightmare, like you're kind of stuck in there. So maybe that's what's reflected.
I'm
Um,
sorry.
no. So you were definitely a student of literature. You actually have master's degrees in Russian and East European area studies from Yale, and then PhD in Slavic literature from Indiana University. First of all, what drew you to this specific sort of the world of literature? Was there anything some specific about Russian and Polish literature, that's what you studied, that appeals to you, that are very different from, say, what Americans are more familiar with, that is American and Western European literature, or even Korean literature that you grew up reading?
Uh, well, I kind of rode the wave at the tail end of the 90s. When the Soviet Union fell in 1991, there was this boom of the surge of interest in the former Soviet bloc and the former communist countries, because essentially in Korea, they were banned during the whole Cold War era. It was very strictly prohibited for any Korean person to be in contact with any commie material. And then suddenly communism is dead and everything is free. So everybody went to study something about Russia. And I kind of went with it. And I just simply wanted to be able to read the Russian letters. They seem very interesting. So if you want to learn the language, then it kind of comes with literature. They're kind of a package deal, Russian literature and language. So I started reading them, and I realized these people are crazy. These people are so like utterly crazy, and they're fascinating, and their literature seems so free. You talked about genre earlier, but if you read Dostoevsky or Nikolai Gogol, they cross genres very freely. Dostoevsky uses techniques from mystery detective novels and Crime and Punishment. Gogol uses the fantastic all the time, and they are the height of Russian literature, right? And this is really good literary work that everybody reads in class. So that was a revelation that you can write serious high literature with the fantastic, with techniques from genre literature, and you can still make very good stories. And I wanted to do that myself. Well, I will never be as good as Dostoevsky, but just try. One can dream.
And it's very interesting for you to say that, because science fiction is, at least in the US, sometimes often seen as a male dominated genre. Yet recently, I think there has been a different point of view coming out when we're looking at the genre, especially when we are looking at authors like Ursula K. Le Guin and Octavia E. Butler, that sci-fi can somehow create really interesting stories about the people who are not in the mainstream, the minorities, whether it's race issues or gender issues. Do you think that this specific quote unquote genre of science fiction or horror or fairy tale, I mean, your story, short stories, a lot of them actually reminds me a lot of fairy tales and old, nursery rhymes. Um, do you, do you think that format, that structure, sometimes let you write about certain issues more freely?
Yes and no. I am going to quote from Professor Alice Helford, who is a scholar of Octavia Butler. And she wrote this brilliant research paper about Blood Child. And what she says is the sum total of Western literary tradition can be summarized into one sentence, and that is a human being finds truth in history. That's the master plot, as Professor Helford puts it, of Western literature, like since Homer, since Virgil to this day. And the protagonist, human, meant for a very long time able-bodied, adult, white, male, cisgender, heterosexual. You know, this particular protagonist was human, and everybody else, disabled, women, children, people of color, all these minorities were not protagonists, not human, right? They were the other. But recently, because people started to get more educated. Education and the skill to read and write was a privilege for a very long time for a very small group of people. And then education was open to everybody. And then people who don't fall into that very narrow definition of protagonist started to tell their stories. So it's a change in literature itself and the change in the world itself. But because science fiction and genre fiction in general dictates that it entertain people. The whole field of genre literature focuses on entertaining the readers. And to be more efficient in entertaining the readers, you have to find new things constantly. And in that respect, science fiction and maybe all of genre literature is more open to having different protagonists, having others as the protagonists, as the focal point of the story. And in that respect, I think the format itself fits that kind of openness, but not always, because the entertainment industry itself is still dominated by cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, adult, white, male. And that, unfortunately, is not going to change anytime soon. But we are trying to push the envelope, and science fiction kind of allows for it.
And I also mentioned that sometimes some of your stories feels very much like those, children's fables or fairy tales. What were you reading when you were growing up? Like, were you an avid reader of all the different types of genre of writings? And what were you inspired by when you were writing these stories?
Well, as I said, these stories span like 18 years, an 18-year period, 17-year period in my life. So I can't really like pinpoint this influenced my entire work of literature. I still don't think my works are literature. I just think them as something I sold to the publisher. But anyways, I read all the Korean myths and legends like 삼국사기, 삼국유사. Those I really love 삼국유사. It's my favorite till to this day. And I read all the fairy tales from. There was it was a boom to buy these 50 volume and 100 volume children's books, and there were like people going around houses to sell these stuff, traveling salespeople, and my mom got hooked and she bought this 100 volume children's book series, and I read and reread all of it. And children's books mostly consist of fairy tales. So I read fairy tales from China, from India, from Europe, all over the world, and it was just so much fun. And I have to tell you about this KBS TV series. They aired once a week, entitled, it was from the late 70s until the late 80s, the Hometown of Legends or something like that. It was the most beloved TV series of the entire 80s, and people watched it every week. My grandmother loved it, and she would just watch it every week with me. And I have to tell you, the TV series was not meant for children. It was not for children. It was scary as hell, and children watched it anyways. And they got scared, and they would like wake up at night screaming, and the parents would call KBS, the TV studio, and like yell at them. But it was so fun. It was so much fun.
The title story is called Cursed Bunny, and literally it's a bunny looking object that carries a curse. But also there's a lot of ideas of revenge in yours. But was it cathartic to you to write about revenge stories? What's your interest in this whole idea of revenge? And because it never feels like anything has been righted per se. Your stories, even if the revenge is completed, I don't feel like it's a happy ending per se. So what's your sort of the idea about the idea of revenge and what that does to your characters?
For my own defense, I'm not the revenge author. I don't always write revenge stories. I do not wake up in the morning and think about revenge all day. These 10 stories were selected from a whole bunch of stories by my editor, and he put together the book. So the original book was his creation, and that's what editors do. They select stories and they pick a topic and they make a product that is the book that makes sense to the reader. So I don't write I don't necessarily write with a specific topic in mind. And well, maybe for separate stories, but I don't really have that in mind to like make a collection with this topic or the theme. But revenge is a big topic, and I do feel catharsis in the middle or the climax part of it. But what I'm trying to say is this shouldn't have happened in the first place. That's why it feels like it doesn't have a happy ending, because I feel that like the title story Cursed Bunny, I wrote it because of that garbage dumpling scandal in the early 2000s. So basically a small company was killed by a smear campaign launched by Big Corpo and the media, and they just very effectively killed the owner and ruined the entire family. And revenge will not bring him back. And I felt really sorry that I was duped by the media campaign, and I thought he did something wrong. And I only found out about the truth like 11 years later. So I felt really guilty about it. And I didn't do anything, but yeah, I kind of, in my mind, I joined the smear campaign and I was duped. So like, that's why I wrote that title story, but that shouldn't have happened. He shouldn't have died like that. And no amount of curse will bring him back. And the revenge will not feel cathartic to the family. Maybe it'll give them some kind of closure, but it just doesn't do anything in real life. That's what I wanted to say. This should not have happened.
So you're also known in Korea as a sort of an activist or professional protester, if you accept that title, for labor issues, gender issues, and the LGBTQ plus community. Um, do you incorporate these issues that you feel obviously very passionate about into your writing, or do you try to separate your writing from your activism, or is that even possible?
I try to separate these issues. First of all, professional protester implies that I get paid for what I do. I do not. No, I spend my own money, so I need to correct that. I'm not like an activist who belongs to a specific organization. Well, I am a member of a labor union, but I'm a member. I'm not an activist there. I tried to separate my writing and these issues for a very long time, simply because I didn't want to get kicked out from work. I was teaching in a university, and teaching is any kind of teacher will know that education is a very conservative field. So I didn't want to seem radical, and I didn't want to seem partial to a specific group of students. I wanted to be impartial to all my students. And most importantly, I didn't want to sell somebody else's stories. I didn't want to sell somebody else's tragedies. I didn't want to sell somebody else's life stories to my own advantage or my own benefit. And but as time goes by and my life is kind of fused, and I quit school, so now nobody's going to kick me out of a job, and I can do whatever I want, I guess. So and I married the leader of my labor union, so it is kind of my life now, and I just can't separate it anymore. So yeah, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing.
That's where you are as a writer today, I guess. So we started talking about you, maybe not totally jokingly, mentioned that you wrote your first short story to win a cash prize. So have your goals for writing changed lately? You've been writing for many years now. Um, do you think your goals for writing, just to tell an interesting story, is it still the same, or where do you think you are in terms of being a writer?
For a very long time, I was an unknown writer, a no-name writer, and after I won that cash prize, it was just a school contest, and it did not make me like known as an author in the Korean literary field or anything. It was just a school contest. So I wrote for myself, and after all the international booker craze, I'm sorry to put it this way, but it was a whirlwind, and it was crazy. But after that, I found myself self-censoring, thinking, is this good enough? Is this as good as what I wrote before? And one cannot write anything if one is thinking about that. So I decided to just go back to what I usually did and write for myself what I find interesting, what I find fun. and write ghost stories if I can't write anything else, and enjoy it. Because if I don't enjoy my own stories, my readers most certainly will not. So I'm trying to cling to that and be fair to other people and not harm anybody by writing stories about them.
So let's talk about the English language version of Cursed Bunny, which was translated by Anton Hur. It was recently published in the UK, and now it's for US publication. Here's the US cover. You worked as a translator for many years, translating Russian and Polish books into Korean. What was it like being this on the other side of the translation process?
Oh my God, it was so weird. um, I'm still a translator. I translate. Oh my God, I have so many deadlines. I'm in trouble. I never imagined anybody would want to translate my book, my stories. So that was a big surprise. And I know the industry. So I thought when Anton first approached me and said he wanted to translate the book, I said, yes, because I said yes immediately, not because, oh my God, somebody's finally going to translate my book. No, I thought, well, you can translate away, but nobody's going to publish it. Translating and publishing are two different things. So you can translate whatever you want. But he got published, and this is just so weird. This is so very weird. And I love the US cover. It's just so cute, and it's the least threatening of all bunny covers that I've seen. It fits the story, but it looks like somebody else's book. Like it feels like somebody else's and not mine. But I'm very fortunate to have Anton as my translator. He put 2 works on the Booker list, so he's amazing as a translator, and we get along very well. And I have to say this, he is a native speaker of Korean. He speaks to his parents in Korean. It's his language at home. And his English is even better, far better than his Korean. So you can imagine the level of language that he has command of. When I see my stories, I see the seams between reality, my own experience, or when somebody told me about their experience, or something I read or heard, and the border between that and my own imagination. And I see my stories as kind of tattered because I know where I made up stuff and I know where things really happened. But Anton kind of got rid of the seams. So his translation is not that tattered. He knows what I was trying to say, and he says it very elegantly. And I wonder, I didn't know what I was trying to say. How does he know what I'm trying to say? I guess that's what a great translator is. He understands and he knows how to express what the text is trying to say. So I am extremely fortunate and I'm very grateful.
That's really interesting what you said about his work. So when you translate somebody else's work, what do you find most challenging and what do you find most satisfying?
I always feel like I'm ruining somebody else's life work, and I feel so guilty. The only good thing is that most of my authors were either killed by the Nazis or killed by Stalin, so they won't know what I'm doing to their work. I try to convey the style as well as the story. So if the style is complicated, if the style is lyrical or dreamy or confusing by intention, then I have to follow that design and and convey the same kind of atmosphere to the readers. And it's not always smooth reading. So my editors hate it. That's a problem. But when readers get it, sometimes my readers understand it. Not they readers know everything. You read and you understand, and readers understand. They see beyond the complicated language and the very awkward translation, and they see that there is an atmosphere, there is a specific style to it, and some people fall in love with it. And that again, I'm very grateful when my readers understand that. But it's the readers that do it. It's I don't think that's because I'm a very good translator. Most of the times I feel like trash.
I was going to ask you, have you ever considered translating your own writing to another language?
Of course I have. I very quickly realized that I do not have the language in me, because when I write fiction, I think about life in Korean, and it's kind of fixed in that language. And I can't really find the language I can't really find the vocabulary in another language. So yeah, I can't. I write in Korean. I write creatively in Korean. I can write a research paper in English, but that's because I was trained to do it. I was never trained. And on a side note, my articles disappear like and the, because Korean doesn't have articles, Russian doesn't have articles, Polish doesn't have articles. So my articles started disappearing when I started writing my dissertation. And my professor, my advisor, was a very, very patient person. He's really nice. And finally he got annoyed, and he said, he wrote in the margin of my draft, just put or the. Just pick something and put it there. I'm really sorry.
What I really enjoyed about your book is actually the length. I have to say, because some of the stories are truly terrifying, some of them are truly unsettling. That I don't know if I could have taken like a book length of that story. So in a sense, the short story was perfect length to really enjoy your stories, because I don't know if I could have enjoyed it if it just went on and on and on. So what do you consider, because you've written full-length fictions, novels, and you also continue to write short stories. How do you decide what to write, whether to write short stories or longer form of fiction?
The story itself decides. I don't decide. And I heard something very similar when I watched the online festival in Poland, and they invited Margaret Atwood. So I'm not trying to compare myself with Margaret Atwood, but she said something like, she was asked a similar question, and she said, when I start writing, she said, when she starts writing, she thinks she knows everything about her characters and the story, but as she progresses as she goes deeper and deeper into the writing, she realizes that she's wrong. And if that happens to Margaret Atwood, then that probably, it's okay when it happens to me. So I've written stories that are longer because they just wouldn't finish. They just wouldn't finish. They would just go on and on. And eventually my back hurts. And I want this to finish, but it just goes on and on. Other times the story finishes and I am quite happy with it. So yeah, just this story decides. I think that is the right way to do it.
Of course. And is there any topics or themes that you are thinking of exploring in the future?
In the future, I have so many deadlines. um, well, I married a guy who is from Pohang, so that's why I moved to Pohang, and it's a port city. It's by the sea, and my mother-in-law and my husband consume enormous amounts of seafood. And before I got married, I didn't know that humans actually ate octopus. I like thought octopus live in the sea and humans live in land, and we lived. I thought we lived separate lives, like happily ever after. And no, humans eat octopus. So that was a big shock. And I wrote a short story about my husband eating octopus, and then that went on to crabs, king crabs, because they sell king crabs around here at the seafood market. And then I wrote a story about sharks and or human beings who sell sharks, human frauds who sell sharks as cure for all. And then my brother-in-law said, well, why don't you do ocean sunfish? So the list is expanding, and I'm writing about sea creatures.
You said it so innocently that you write about sea creatures. Having read this book, I I am anticipating with horror and fascination what these stories are. Is Anton Hur planning to translate more of your books into English?
Yeah, Anton seems to quite like my stories, so I hope he is. And Anton is actually writing a novel, so in English. So I'm going to translate him. I'm going to be his translator.
I can't wait to read both the English and Korean version.
Thank you.
So, is there anything you want to say to your new readers in America? And if you can say a few words to those who will be watching this program.
Those of you who are watching this program, well, thank you for bearing with me. Those of you who are going to read my stories, nothing happens in the bathroom. You can go to the bathroom, nothing will happen, it's okay. And contraceptive pills do not make you pregnant if you take them correctly. But if you don't take them correctly, then it's because you didn't take them correctly. Contraceptive pills themselves do not make you pregnant. I had that question from a 13-year-old. It was actually the International Booker Prize winning translator Daisy Rockwell and her daughter Serafina. So her daughter is a teenager, 13 years old, and she really loves my stories. Do not give the book to teenagers. Like, this is not for children. Why do you give Chris Bunny to your children? Why do you read it to? Anyways, so Ms. Rockwell was working in her room. Serafina was reading in another room, and then the whole house was quiet. And then Serafina yelled, "Mom, do pills make you pregnant?" No. So I'm like disseminating fake news to the younger generation and ruining their lives and stuff. Yeah, I apologize.
And if you haven't read Curse Bunny, you'll have to read and find out what we were just talking about.
You know, but thank you.
But thank you so much, Bora. It was such a pleasure to speak with you, and we can't wait to read more from you. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much.